In the Vedic tradition, but it's also present in a lot of other mystical traditions, in mystical Christianity, in Kabbalah, there is a notion that we choose our lives. That can be an incredibly loaded concept to digest for many people, because there is so much in any human life that we wouldn't wish upon ourselves or others. There's loss, there's heartache, there is sickness, there's abuse. And so it is not on the material surface level any kind of justification of that, or blaming, or saying you have bad karma because that happened to you. But it's a way of acknowledging that sometimes difficult circumstances are the only way in through which our soul, or jiva as they call it in the Vedic tradition, can learn or digest or absorb a given lesson. And I see this very clearly in my life. I would not be sitting here talking about all of these things, doing this with my life. I'd probably be a corporate lawyer, or I would just be singing opera if I hadn't had a back operation when I was 13. And I had it for scoliosis. I really didn't want to have it, but then the surgeon kind of cajoled me because he said, you'll have to wear a back brace for less time. And the back brace was incredibly painful. So I had these 2 rods put into my back, and I, on the just basic level, I'm very fortunate that I had a really talented surgeon, and due to a lot of other factors, recovered much more quickly than most people in my situation. But that said, there were a lot of compensations that happened from having a major back surgery and not doing as much post-surgery work as I would now choose for my child to do or something. But as a result of that, as I got older, it started to affect my singing because of the way in which my intercostal muscles and my rib cage, etc., were compressed and constrained, and just certain flexibility that I didn't have as a result of the rods, even though nowadays I probably have more flexibility than a lot of people without rods. But there are still certain ways in which my body is just not going to bend because my body is metal there, or it's constrained by metal. I would say, in a way, some of those compensations around the scoliosis, both physical and emotional, that even put my voice in a position of compromise when I was 19, that then forced me to seek out Alexander technique, yoga, meditation, Feldenkrais, Gurdjieff work, all of the stuff that has shaped me, yes, as an artist, but more fundamentally as a human. And I see all of the connection of dots very clearly now. Like, it doesn't sound super profound. It's not this great mystical, story of I went to the river and this, flamingo started talking to me and told me what I should do with my life, and I've done it ever since, and now I'm, enlightened. It's not like that. It's a little bit, more pedestrian, but it's very profound when I think about it, because I could easily reject that had happened to me, and I could easily lament that had happened to me. And as someone who loves yoga and Pilates and dance and movement, and who wants her back bend to be perfect, or who wants, this to have ultimate flexibility in, flexion or this or that, there are these moments still, despite how much capacity I have in my body, where the rods don't allow me to have that, or the curvature doesn't allow me to have that. And even that has been a gift, because it has taught me not to be a shape snob, that it is the quality of the movement, it's the amount of freedom internally experienced, it's the spiritual tenor of something, not the physical manifestation, that most matters. And yeah, if I hadn't found Alexander technique and it hadn't had such an impact on my singing, I wouldn't have had the spiritual awakening that I had when I was in college, that came at a time in my life when I was emotionally and existentially, intellectually really searching, where I didn't find the ivory tower of either conservatory or university particularly fulfilling, where I had my heart broken for the first time. It all happened at the same time. And yet the only way I survived it was through these practices. And that as a result of coming out of that and having some more traditionally mystical experiences, I came to the point where I yearned for a structure on which to hang those organic experiences that were coming up in me, but to structure them in a systematic way where I could have a teacher and a process and a whole united philosophy of how to further cultivate what was naturally just happening. And that's ultimately landed me in first Buddhist meditation, but then Vedic meditation. And from all of that, I sit here today. And in a way, the genesis of that is choosing a life where I had to have a back surgery. And so, yeah, was it the most fun? It certainly created certain obstacles and difficulties and pains in my life, but it has also borne me, in a certain sense, my life's work of integrating art, spirituality, and somatics. And so I'm deeply thankful to it. Even as an addendum, a year ago I was in Bali for a project, and I was at a contact improvisation, a wonderful form of self-exploration and dance that I encourage everyone to play with. And I met this fantastic human called Mirakle. And Mirakle was not his given name, and I asked him, how'd you get this name, Mirakle? And he told me this wild story. He was formerly an actor from the US who had lived in Bali for many years and was something of a well-known yoga teacher there. And so had this great body and this great movement practice. And he said about 5 or so years ago, he had been, I think, at either the Spanish or some other European embassy in Bali, and he was out on a roof deck and the deck collapsed. And he fell like 3 floors and was covered by all this rubble. He had to have major back surgery, as emergency surgery, and the only way for the Balinese doctors at the time that they could think of to save his life was to insert 4 metal rods. Essentially, there's lots of iterations to the story, but he, as someone who is so, in touch with holistic living and being in his body and not using technology, etc., really came to have a desire to get these rods removed. And no Western doctor would agree to do it until he finally was working with Joe Dispenza and found some surgeons in Singapore who agreed to do it. And then he went on this really deep healing journey to integrate that experience. And you look at him today, you would never guess that he had this, other than the little scar. He's stronger, more integrated, he moves well. He was one of the most fun dance partners to ever dance with. He's just a delight, and he's super radiant. We were at a cafe discussing with another friend his whole experience, and when he went to leave, my friend, who knew I had had the rods in my back for a different reason, said, "Oh, hearing his story, does it make you want to get your rods removed?" And I said, honestly, and I'm not saying this because his story isn't amazing, absolutely not. Because I just gnostically understand that my journey is to have these rods, to accept them, to work within them, to work around them, to accept that I will never be able to have the flexion of a Martha Graham dancer, and to admire it from afar, even though there's so much that I can't express through my body. And it is always a reminder of surrender and acceptance. And, so 2 similar-ish circumstances of having this thing put into you that causes you pain, but also supports your body in its healing. And for one person, their karma dharma can be to get them removed. And that's the story that really makes them an epigenetic miracle. And in my case, learning to live with them and integrate them, just like we might learn to integrate any other wound or trauma that happens to us, has been the work of my life.